exactly 5 months ago, on the evening separating the 20th and 21st of Tishrei, I stood at this very spot to introduce Rabbi Krauss himself before he delivered the keynote address for the HoShana Rabba learning program. I welcomed him back after an absence caused by the pandemic, with the prayer that he would become the fixture in the Bet Midrash for our newest meeting, as he had been for more than 15 machzorim of our past meeting. Alas, that masterful shiur, of which we will see a snippet later on, would be the last that he would deliver, and instead we feel the vacuum left in the wake of his absence. I want to thank Rabbi Krauss, Rivka Naftali, Tini and Shana, Aviva and Dani Shai, and the entire family for affording us this opportunity to honor his memory and to express our feelings of the loss that has befallen us. The Mishnah in the 4th parak of Avot reads, Rabbi Shimon Omer, Shloshach Tarim Hen, Keter Torah, Keter Kahuna, Keter Malchut, Keter Shem Tov Ole Al Gabehem. Rabbi Shimon said there are 3 crowns: the crown of Torah, the crown of Kahuna, the crown of Malchut, of royalty, and the crown of Shem Tov, literally a good name, rises above them. Looking at the Mishnah, an obvious problem presents itself. Rabbi Shimon states that there are 3 crowns, yet he lists 4. Indeed, when the grouping is listed in the Gemara in Yoma, the 4th crown is conspicuously absent. Rabbi Yochanan, Shlosha Zerim Hen, Shel Mizbeach, V'Shel Aron, V'Shel Shulchan, Shel Mizbeach Zacha Aron U'Nitzalo, Shel Shulchan Zacha David U'Nitzalo, Shel Aron Adayin Unachu, Kol HaRotze Likach Yavo V'Yikach, Shema Tomar Pachotu, Talmud Lomar, Bim Rachim Yinochu. Rabbi Yochanan said 3 crowns exist in the Mikdash, of the Mizbeach, of the Aron, of the Shulchan. The crown of the Mizbeach was taken by Aharon the Kohen. The crown of the table was taken by Dovid. The crown of the Aron remains open to all takers. Lest one say that this last crown of Torah is the least important, the Pasuk responds, it is through me, through the Torah, that kings reign. Troubled by the lack of symmetry between the introduction and the actual listing of the crowns, of Aviva in his commentary undercuts the assumption that the 4 crowns are to be judged as a group. He points out that a careful reading of the Mishnah indicates that the original grouping of the 3 crowns refers only to Torah, Kahuna, and Malchut. With all of their inherent distinctions, the 3 crowns are cast in the same mold. They are metaphoric representations of a defined group or individual. The significance represented by the Keter is tangible. It endows its bearers with the Kedusha, governing the particular responsibilities that they have. Keter Shem Tov, as a category, argues of Aviva, stands apart from the other crowns. Its definition is more elusive. What exactly are its qualities? Perhaps we would include integrity, reliability, spiritual character. But even with the definition on hand, we could not point to a resulting changed status of the bearer, certainly not from a formalistic perspective. No category of Shem Tov parallel to Kohen or Melech exists. No specialized Kedusha is created by it. Nevertheless, it is what transforms the other elements into Ketarim in the first place. Omnam Keter Shem Tov hane'emar b'mishnatenu, says the Abarbanel, eino Keter Revi'i, aval hu t'nai hachrafi davek im shar haketarim shetzarich, she'im kol echad mehem yimtza Shem Tov, ba'az hem nikra'im Ketarim, ka'asher Shem Tov ole al gabehem. Indeed, the Keter Shem Tov stated in our Mishnah is not really a 4th crown at all. Rather, it is a necessary condition that needs to be linked to the other Ketarim. For only if each one of them is coupled with the Shem Tov can it truly be called a crown, for the authenticity that is Shem Tov rises above them and imbues them with character. Rabbi Krauss Zatzal was a person who embodied all of the crowns. He was granted Keter Kuhuna at birth, earned his Keter Torah through a lifetime of learning and teaching, through a love of Torah that was expressed in virtually every word, even every breath that left his mouth. Keter Malchut became his through his crowning achievement, as it is stated in the Gemara in its description of David HaMelech. Kach amar David l'fnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ribono shel Olam, kol malchei Mizrach u'Ma'arav yoshvim agudot b'chvodam, va'ani yadai meluchlachot, kedei l'taher isha l'va'ala. So said David before the Ribono shel Olam, all of the kings of the east and the west sit gathered in their honor, in their glory, but my hands are made dirty in order to purify a woman for her husband. Or in Rabbi Krauss's case, lahatir agunot mi ba'ala. Rabbi Krauss could have easily stayed with the other Gedolei Torah wearing their crowns, gathered together b'chvodam, but he preferred to dirty his hands in order to assist those who needed his help. It was the Keter Shem Tov that held it all together and created the persona that we loved and admired. He was always the first to finish Shmona Esrei before the Chazan could even consider waiting to begin Chazarat Hashatz. Before he went to Riverdale to work on the IBD, he came to me without a trace of irony and asked by Reshut, I'm not kidding, who else had that anava? Who else had that sense of responsibility to the Talmidim of the Yeshiva? This past Chanukah, I called to consult him the last time that I had the school to consult with him regarding a practice in a chuppah that I was being misader. He said to me, you're a Rosh Yeshiva. You shouldn't do it. I responded and I said to him, but would you do it? And he said, yeah, I'd do it, but I'm not a Rosh Yeshiva. Needless to say, I did it. Keter Torah, Keter Kuhuna, Keter Malchut, the Keter Shem Tov, Ole Al. He is and will always be very sorely missed. Tonight's program touches 3 continents and reflects the impact that Rabbi Krauss had on the Yeshiva. One of his last students, Chavutot, Raphael Kastner, an alumnus from last year who learned regularly with him via Zoom, will start with the Siyum Hashas from England. Rabbi Dan Margulies, who came as a Shana Aleph student the first year that Rabbi Krauss was with us and was a protege of his in Riverdale, will speak as well. Dr. Aviva Kornbluth, his daughter, will share the family's perspective. Rabbi Zvi Grumet will speak from the viewpoint of the faculty, and Rabbi Ebner, Rosh Yeshiva, will close. I especially want to thank, at this point, Todd Berman for putting together this evening's program. Rabbi Berman does it all. There's no tech person in the world who is a bigger Talmid Chacham, but every facet of the program, be it the content, technology, the technical, is all his doing. That we go.
Okay.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Great. Thank you. So I was very lucky to learn with Rabbi Krauss as well. He came back and he taught us in Yeshiva from Kaitzman last year. And then after I left Yeshiva, I emailed him saying I'd love to continue learning with him. And he said absolutely. And so we got to learn and have a chavruta every Friday morning, which was, I think, the highlight of my week. And he was just an amazing teacher, and I really loved learning with him. And I will never forget learning the first Pachad Yitzchak with him. And he said, oh, Rav Hutner taught it to me, and we sat down and he just spoke it to me. And just the way he explained it to me was just amazing. And I won't forget that, I don't think. But he's an incredible teacher, and I wish the family a long life and only smachot. So Masechet Uktim is the final Masechet in Seder Tahara, which is the last of the Starim, and it deals with the laws of impurities and Taharat and so on, but to do with fruits and vegetables and their stalks and bits that are connected to the actual things that you eat and what happens if you touch it, and goes into quite a lot of detail. So I'll go to the final Mishnah, which ironically has nothing to do with any laws of Taharat, etc. But anyway, so I'll read it first in Hebrew, then in English. So Amar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, Atid HaKadosh Baruch Hu lehanchil l'chol tzadik b'tzadik 310 olamot shene'amar lehanchil ohavai yesh v'otzrotehem amalei. Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Chalafta, Lo matah HaKadosh Baruch Hu kli machazik bracha l'Yisrael ela hashalom shene'amar Hashem oz la'amo yiten Hashem yivarach et amo v'shalom. Which means Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says, the Holy One, blessed be He, will in the future cause every righteous one to inherit 310 worlds. For it is written from Mishlei that I may cause those who love me to inherit, and the word is yesh is used there, and I will fill their treasures. Rabbi Shimon ben Chalafta says, Holy One, blessed be He, found no vessel that could hold Israel's blessings except peace, as it's written in Tehillim. The Lord will give His strength to His people. The Lord will bless His people with peace. Which is a very nice ending to say the Torah. And Hadran alach shita sidrei mishnah v'adrachalan. Da'atan alach shita sidrei mishnah v'da'tachalan. Lo nitnashem minach shita sidrei mishnah v'lo titnashem minan. Lo v'alma hadein v'lo v'alma da'teh. Hadran alach shita sidrei mishnah v'adrachalan. Da'atan alach shita sidrei mishnah v'da'tachalan. Lo nitnashem minach shita sidrei mishnah v'lo titnashem minan. Lo v'alma hadein v'lo v'alma da'teh. Hadran alach shita sidrei mishnah v'adrachalan. Da'atan alach shita sidrei mishnah v'da'tachalan. Lo nitnashem minan minach shita sidrei mishnah v'lo titnashem minan. Lo v'alma hadein v'lo v'alma da'teh. Yiratzon mefnecha Adonai Eloheinu v'lehavotenu she'teh Toratacha u'menatenu ba'olam hazeh u'teh imanu le'olam haba. Chanina bar Papa, Rami bar Papa, Nachman bar Papa, Achai bar Papa, Abba Mari bar Papa, Rafan bar Papa, Rachish bar Papa, Surcha bar Papa, Ada bar Papa, Dara bar Papa. Harevna Adonai Eloheinu et divrei Toratcha befinu v'fifot amcha beit Yisrael v'nianachnu v'tetenu v'teteh amcha beit Yisrael kolanu yodei shemecha v'lomdei Toratecha ma'avai techa k'meinu mitzvotecha kilo olam hili v'tamim b'chukecha lam'an lo evosh l'lam lo eshkach pechutecha ki vam chitani baruch ata Adonai lamdenu chukecha amen 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 sela va'ed. Modim anachnu lefanecha Adonai Eloheinu v'lehavotenu shesamta chalkenu מיושבי בית המדרש, ולא שמת חלקנו מיושבי קרנות, שאנו משכימים בהם משכימים. אנו משכימים לדברי תורה, בהם משכימים לדברים בטלים. אנו עמלים בהם עמלים. אנו עמלים ומקבלים שכר, בהם עמלים ואינם מקבלים שכר. אנו רצים והם רצים. אנו רצים לחיי העולם הבא, והם רצים לבאר שחת שנאמר, ואתה אלוהים תורידים לבאר שחת אנשי דמים, וממל לא יחצו ימיהם ואני אבטח בך. יהי רצון בפניך, אדוני אלוהי, כשם שעזרתני לסיים שיטת סדרי משנה. כן תעזרני להתחיל מסכתות וספרים אחרים מסוימים, ללמוד וללמד, לשמור ולעשות, ולקיים את כל דברי תלמוד תורתך באהבה, בזכות כל התנאים והאמוראים ותלמידי חכמים, יעמוד לי ולזרעי, שלא תמוש התורה מפי ומפי זרעי וזרע זרעי עד עולם, ויתקיים בי והלכך תנחה אותך, ושכבך תשמור עליך. בקיצותה כי תשיחך, כי וירבו ימיך ויוסיפו לך שנות חיים. אורך ימים בימינה ושמאלה עושב וכבוד. אדוני עוז לעמו ייתן, אדוני יברך את עמו בשלום.
Israel, by the love is man, Karibim, Ruameh. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much. Bereshut Harabanim, Bereshut Rosh Yeshiva, and Bereshut the Shpacha of Mori Rabbi Rabbi Krauss. Take the opportunity to share a few reflections and thoughts on the long relationship I had with him. I first started learning with Rabbi Krauss when I arrived in Yeshiva in Israel at Eretz Tzvi, and tried to squeeze in the opportunity in as many venues and opportunities as I could, whether in the Yeshiva, in formal shiurim, whether private chavruta, whether in tal bagels or at his dining room table, Shabbos meals, Shabbos afternoons, and many other times. I corresponded continuously with him throughout college. He served as Mesader Kiddushin for my wife Ilana and me. He encouraged me to study for Simcha. When he was in Riverdale working on his international Beit Din, I helped him with research and typing and driving him various places. Eventually, he gave me the great privilege to receive a private smicha from him. He attended over Zoom my installation as the rabbi of the Riverdale Minyan, and he gave me the greatest compliment that I've ever received, which I won't share with you because it was a gross exaggeration. There was an obituary for Rav Krauss, which was published in the New York Times, but really focused almost entirely on his work with International Beit Din. At the same time, all of us who knew him personally, especially his Talmidim in the Yeshiva, would always be able to tell you about his kindness, his generosity, his hospitality, his dedication to truth and to transparency. And I really want to go beyond that and share a couple of personal anecdotes, things that maybe happened just between the two of us or with only a few other people there. Maybe some of them were events related to Yeshivat Eretz Tzvi as well. Maybe some of you remember. The first is I was driving him to our friend Avi Snyder, also an alumnus of Yeshivat Eretz Tzvi, Avi Snyder and his wife Michelle's wedding, where Rav Krauss served as one of the Eidim. And he was telling me in the car, he said, I came to this country in 1948, and I heard people talking about someone named JB. And they said he's such a makil that he lets you eat gelatin. And when I got older, then I found out who this JB really was. And Rav Krauss said he was a man for whom the shiur, and by that I mean Talmud Torah, study of Torah, the teaching of Torah, was everything. You could hear him speak at many other times, but he lived for the shiur. And I think that characterization of Rav Soloveitchik pervades so much of the influence that Rav Krauss, who he was and the influence that he had, which is that fundamentally, especially in his time in Eretz Tzvi, but really in his time as a community rabbi as well, fundamentally and at his core was dedicated to teaching Torah, to studying Torah, to spreading not only his own original insights, but often much more, sharing Torah Harav, making sure that the insights and methodology of Rav Soloveitchik would be transmitted to the next generation. I'd like to remark briefly on the nickname for Rav Soloveitchik, JB, which on occasions I even heard Rav Krauss use, though often he was much more hesitant to refer to him in such a somewhat disparaging way. Reminds for me the Gemara Masachet Chulin, Daf Kuf Lamed Zayin, where Isi Barhini arrives from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael and is discussing with Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan, of course, needs to get an update. Rabbi Yochanan asks, Man Reish Sidra beBavel, who is the Rosh Yeshiva in Bavel now? And Isi Barhini says, Abba Aricha, it's Abba Aricha. And Rabbi Yochanan says, I don't understand. How can you possibly call him Abba Aricha? I sat 17 rows behind Rav in the shiur of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. I saw the sparks flying between them, and you call him by a nickname. And that, on the one hand, the familiarity and closeness that, of course, Rav Krauss had with his Rabbi Rav Soloveitchik, and at the same time, the deep level of love and respect and care that he had for the Rav's legacy, I think is something that he really transmitted to all of us who learned with him. One other aspect of Rav Krauss's teaching that he really did pass on to his students was a need for his students to have their own opinions and to be able to articulate them. And for me, this I most vividly remember there was a fundraiser for Yeshivat Eretz Tzvi. It was at someone's home. I think it was in Teaneck, and Rabbi Krauss was speaking, and he spoke about the Gemara from Masachet Gittin about Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkolas, that the so-called humility of Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkolas was what led to the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. And Rav Krauss connected it to the only other appearance of this Rabbi Zechariah, which is in the Tosefta in Masachet Shabbat, where he's even more stringent than either Beit Hillel or Beit Shammai. And Rav Krauss started to talk about the modern day English language halacha books that you often find in Sfarim stores and things like this. And he sometimes called them Chumrah books. And he said, they're all the same. Rabbi Kotler says this and Rabbi Feinstein says this, but I want to know, what do you say? What do you think? And he would always ask us when we were learning together, actually, what do we think the answer should be? Which side of the machloket do we find compelling? Whose arguments are stronger? Because Torah isn't only about amassing a wealth of knowledge, but it really was also always about coming to a conclusion, being able to use the knowledge that you have to bear on your life in a practical way. Another very powerful anecdote, and with this I'll close, of Rav Krauss's teaching and his style of teaching and his methodology in learning and in teaching. I remember from Shabbat HaGadol, he spoke at the Riverdale Minyan. This was before I had been hired to serve as the rabbi. And Rav Krauss was referencing the comment of the Drisha in Or Chaim about what is it that makes Shabbat HaGadol Gadol? What's so great about it? The most straightforward answer, which the Drisha acknowledges, is that it has to do with a direct quote from the Haftarah, which uses the word Gadol. But of course, he wanted to explain a deeper explanation. And the Drisha talks about how there was a great miracle, that Shabbat HaGadol was the Shabbat before Yetziat Mitzrayim. The Jewish people had all gathered their sheep for the Korban Pesach and tied them to their beds. And that the miracle was that the sheep didn't make a lot of noise, and therefore the Egyptians didn't freak out and didn't get offended and didn't attack the Jewish people. And Rav Krauss took this in a very deep way and said, that's what makes it a nes gadol. That's what makes it a great miracle. All the other miracles of Yetziat Mitzrayim, yes, they were for our safety and for our protection to help us reach our freedom, but they did come at the price of the Egyptian suffering and the loss of life among the Egyptians, especially among many innocents as well, perhaps. And Rav Krauss said the miracle of Shabbat HaGadol was that it was a miracle where no one suffered. It was a miracle that brought about peace and calm and tranquility. And of course, so many of those are exactly what Shabbat is supposed to symbolize for us. And therefore, that's really what makes it a great miracle. I think that dedication, as Mr. Kastner said from the Mishnah, the dedication to Shalom. Shalom is the Kli Machzik Bracha. We know that from the Mishnah and Avot that to be a Kohen and to be Talmidav Shel Aharon, one of the students of Aharon HaKohen, is to be Rodef Shalom, to search out Shalom, to bring Shalom into the world, to bring more bracha into the world through one's dedication to the values of Torah, to teaching Torah and spreading it to all of your students. That was something very much was in every moment of Rav Krauss's life. And we were all privileged and blessed to have been able to learn from him and to be able to take the teachings that he shared with us forward to the next generation. Thank you.
Yeshivat Eretz Tzvi honors Rabbi Simcha Krauss. Born into an intellectual rabbinic family, Rabbi Krauss survived the German-Soviet struggle during World War II and the communist takeover of his home in Romania. Fleeing to the United States in 1948, the Krauss family ultimately settled in the Washington Heights section of Manhattan, where the patriarch, Rabbi Dr. Avraham Dovid HaKohen Krauss, became the Rav. With a mixture of Romanian German intellectualism on his father's side and Hasidic spiritualism inherited from his mother, Rabbi Krauss attended Yeshiva's Chasam Sofer. When it came time to move on after high school, despite being courted by Rav Aaron Cutler to join the base medrash of Lakewood, Rabbi Krauss chose to attend Yeshiva's Chaim Berlin. Chaim Berlin enabled him to eventually attend the City College of New York. Maintaining a close relationship with Chaim Berlin's famed Rosh Yeshiva, Rav Yitzchak Hutner, Rabbi Krauss was given special permission to attend the shirim of Rav Yosef Dov Halevi Soloveitchik at Yeshiva University. Rabbi Krauss's blend of profound intellectual acumen and Alumnus learning, his close relationship with some of the greatest Talmidei Chachamim in America, and his experience having been raised in a prestigious rabbinic home uniquely prepared him for his future career as Rav in America. With his dear wife Esther, Rabbi Krauss assumed leadership roles in several kehilot. In 1965, the Krausses moved to Utica, New York, where Rabbi Krauss led congregation Beis Yaakov, founded a day school, and continued pursuing academic studies in political science, a subject he began to teach in university. After several years in the quiet town of Utica, the Krausses moved westward to the young Israel of St. Louis. Always investing in increasing Torah, Rabbi Krauss also founded the Block Yeshiva High School. After a decade in St. Louis, the Krausses returned to their family roots, and Rabbi Krauss assumed the role of Rav of Young Israel of Hillcrest in Queens. During that time, Rabbi Krauss taught in the IBC program of Yeshiva University, became the leader of the Orthodox Zionists of America, and a pivotal figure in the Rabbinical Council of America. Retiring from a life of service to the American Jewish community, Rav Simcha and Esther not only preached Zionism, but fulfilled the dream by moving to Eretz Yisrael. At this time, Rabbi Krauss's and Yeshivat Eretz Tzvi's paths crossed. Rabbi Krauss teaches a variety of courses and is an integral member of the senior faculty. In addition to influencing young future Jewish leaders, Rabbi Krauss has taken on a new role of Av Beis Din in the soon-to-be-established International Beit Din for Gittin. His impact on American Orthodoxy and world Jewry has changed in powerful new ways. Yeshivat Eretz Tzvi is proud to honor Rav Simcha Krauss, Rav, Talmid Chacham, and light of modern Orthodoxy and Zionism.
Where are you on fire? Brother and sister and brother-in-law, Rosh Yeshiva, and of course all of the students here today. Thank you so much for marking the Sheloshim for our father and for inviting us to partake and participate. It's quite difficult to be up here today. I've spoken many times in my life and even in front of and for my father. But I don't think I ever actually spoke from a place where I know he himself shared so much joy. It is with great trepidation that I do so. Because while I know we would be happiness to be here, I also know that I'm not anywhere fit to fill my father's shoes. So I won't even try. Instead, I would just like to share some thoughts that I think are relevant to Yeshiva Eretz Tzvi. Those of you who had the privilege of learning with my father might remember him often having a message, but always starting with that fact that he wanted to put that message in context or use a particular frame of reference. I will use as my frame of reference something that has been bothering me about the parsha we read in Shul yesterday, Parsha Kitisa. I don't know why it never bothered me before. I definitely thought about it, but as I was listening to the Balakori yesterday reading about Cheda Egel, I couldn't get past the role of Aaron. Growing up in school, my parents sent me to Beis Yaakov. I learned that Bnei Israel wanted to bring the Egel, and Aaron did what he could to stop them. But if you look through the text, it just isn't so. It seems so clear, so simple when you read Perek Lamed Bet. וירא העם כי בושש משה לרדת מן האף. ויקרא העם על אהרון ויאמרו אליו, קום עשה לנו אלוהים אשר ילכו לפנינו, כי זה משה איש אשר עלינו מארץ מצרים לא ידענו מה היה. So it's true that the Israel were the ones who noticed that Moshe wasn't coming down from the mountain. And they went to Aaron and said, make us a God. But then there's no protest, there's no response, there's no attempt to deal with the people's rebellion. Right away, Aaron says, "Vayomer Aleim Aaron, Sharakun is me'azahav asher b'aznei neshechem v'neichem v'bnotechem v'aviu elai. Bring me all your gold and your jewels." So they did. And what happened? He takes it from their hands, vayikach mi'adam, vayatzer oto b'charet, vayaseu egel masecha. They bring it to him, and still, he doesn't like do something else with it. He makes it into an egel. And then, of course, vayomru, Eila Elohecha Yisrael asher alucha me'eretz Mitzrayim. Vayomru, so you could say it wasn't Aaron, it was Bnei Israel. Turn this quickly into an avodah zarah. And then what happened? Vayar Aaron, so you think, okay, now we saw that they turned it into an egel. Vayiven mizbeach b'fanav. Vayikra Aaron vayomar chag l'Hashem machar. He built them an altar for the avodah zarah that they just built. And he said, "Will be a chag l'Hashem tomorrow." And they turned it into a full-blown worship of avodah zarah. Now, the Mefarshim pick up on something real in the Pshat. The Chamalei quotes of Yehuda Levi in Sefer HaKuzari, and in the same vein, Ebner quotes Rav Sadigon, saying that Aaron was actually egging on the nation because he saw that things were getting out of control, and he wanted to pick out the idol worshippers from the crowd so that they could be punished later and clean up the nation. Both Rabbi Yehuda Levi and Ebner reject these readings, and Rabbi Yehuda Levi even points out that Aaron was punished for this later. So Aaron does seem to bear at least some sort of blame for this catastrophic, tragic sin of the Jewish people at a time that's supposed to be the pinnacle of holiness for Am Yisrael as a nation. Matan Torah, the experience of God through the Aseret HaDibur at Sinai. But I think we can shed a bit more light on how this came to be by looking at what Aaron did in the context of the passages in the Parsha that come right before, especially as Rashi points out around these Siyum, that this is an example of Ein Muktam U'Muchar B'Torah. These events didn't happen in this order historically, but are rather written in this order to teach us a particular message. So if we look a little earlier in the Torah, there are three things that strike me as particularly relevant. First, in Perek Lamed, there's a description of all the things that are going to be used in the Mishkan. The kiyur, which are going to be used by the Kohanim to wash their hands. And then the shemen ha-mishchat. V'asitoto shemen mishchat kodesh rokeach berkachat ma'aser rokeach shemen mishchat kodesh yiyah. And what is this shemen mishchat? What is this oil going to be used for? It's going to be used to make everything holy. It's going to be used for the Olam Moed and the Shulchan and the Menorah and all the Kelim and the Mizbeach. And then the Kiddush Totam, Vayu Kodesh Kodashim, Kol HaNogeh B'Hamikdash, the Etz Aharon, the Etz Banav Timshach, the Kiddush Totam L'Kahelim. This oil that's going to be used to make everything holy, it's going to be used to make Aaron and all of the Kohanim holy, Kadosh. And then there's another description of the different incenses and things that are to be sacrificed, all described many times with the same word, Kedusha, holiness. Then, in the beginning of Perek Lamed Aleph, there's what we call, I guess, the appointing of the architectural and interior design staff, so to speak, of the Mishkan, which off the top of my head always struck me as being Bezalel. But let's read the inside carefully. Is it really just Bezalel? Re'ei karati b'shem Bezalel ben Kor l'matei Yehuda. V'amalei to ruach Elohim v'chasmav u'b'shinach u'b'dav u'b'chol melachah. Right? I will appoint Bezalel from Shevet Yehuda, and I will fill him with ruach Elohim and chasmah and tmunah and dat. And going on, I will even give him the artistic tendencies, the ability to do this stuff. But it doesn't end there. Actually, In addition to B'Tzalel, I'm also going to appoint Eliyav ben Achisamach. He's going to be his right hand man. He's not from Levi. He's not from Yehuda. He's from Dan. He's from the Menaseh. He's from the low man on the totem pole, the last Shevet and the whole camping of Bnei Israel. He's going to be his assistant. But it doesn't end there either. Ubelev kol chacham lev natati chachma v'asu et kol asher tziviticha. Actually, it's not just B'Tzalel and it's not just Eliyav. Ubelev kol chacham lev. Anybody who considers themselves and finds within themselves chacham lev, anybody like that, natati chachma, I will give them to the chachma, and they too will be part of the building of the Mishkan. As I note that in these psukim, there's only one mention of the term kedusha, and that is in Pasuk Yud, when describing the design that the design and building team will be making the clothing of the Kohanim. That Bigdei HaKodesh V'Aron HaKohen, that Bigdei V'Anav Lepei. In addition to making everything else, they'll be designing the clothing for the Kohanim. Finally, the last topic described in Parashat Aleph, before the description of Keda Egel and Mokor, is one of the times the Torah describes the commandment of Shabbat. After chapter Tait Shmoru, Ki oti b'nu v'nechem v'dorotchem ladat ki ani Adonai mekadishchem. Keep Shabbat, because it is a sign between me and you, Bnei Israel, for all of the generations, because I, Hashem, am making you holy. I think if you look at the description of Aaron and the Kohanim in our parsha on the one hand, and the design staff on the other, with the description of Shabbat in between, maybe we can begin to understand what happened to Aaron during Keda Egel. Aaron understood himself as the Kohen Gadol and his children as the Kohanim to be the keepers of Kedusha. So when Bnei Israel came to him and said, make us a god, he said, okay, go do what we're supposed to be doing in the Mishkan. Bring me your gold, bring me your jewels, and I will make it Kadosh. So he built an Egel, because he assumed that if he built an Egel, being the representative, the agent of Kedusha in this world, it would by definition be Kadosh. There was no way it could be otherwise. He was the Kohen Gadol, but he was missing one piece. Bnei Israel's role in the Mishkan was not just to bring the gold and let the Kohanim serve God. He didn't have a monopoly on serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In order for his avodah to be kadosh, it needed to be a joint effort, not just physically, but spiritually, together with Bnei Israel. The design team with Bnei Israel were not there just to draw and carve and cut and chisel. Hashem instilled them with chokhmah and binah and dat, with ideas and thoughts and essential contributions. And in building the team, God said, this is not a hierarchy. Yes, I'm appointing B'Tzalel. But you know what? It's not just him. It's also Acholiav from Yeshiva. And not just any Shevet but Shevet son. But you know what? It's not just him either. It's anyone who believes kol chacham live natati chachma. Anyone who feels in his heart that connection to God, anyone who's chacham live, I will give that person from my chachma. And only when those people come together will they make the clothing of the Kohanim Bigdei Kodesh. Why? Because God says, I have given my Kedusha not just to you, Aaron, and to your children, but achat totai tishmonu ki oti b'nu v'nechem v'dorotchem ladat ki ani Adonai mekadishchem. Ultimately, the holiness which comes from me, I share it with all of you. And yes, you, Aaron, have a special role, but the divine holiness, the divine Kedusha is a joint effort. It's a mutual thing that can only be created when the avodah is mishutah, when it involves on all levels, not just the Kohanim, but all of Bnei Israel. As you've heard already a few times today, my father was a Kohen. All my life has held much significance for me somehow, in ways that I both understood and those that I didn't really understand. But what's important for you to know, is that my father's Kedusha was a Kedusha Mishutefet. My father knew that his Avodah Hashem was not a conduit through which others could access a God that was his alone. My father's Avodah Hashem was a journey, and one that he was acutely aware could not be traveled without partners on that journey. Partners of all ages, partners of all stripes and colors. You know, as has been said over and over again over the past month, my father's two great loves were of Torah and of people. And as Lord Rabbi Zatzal said, Hakarat HaTov, gratitude, is the bedrock of Judaism. The first words we are taught to say each morning, immediately on waking, he says, are modani, I give thanks. We think before we think. Note that the normal word order is inverted, modeh ani, not ani modeh, so that in Hebrew, the thanks comes before the I. So it is only natural that, as we have mentioned many times over the past month, my father said thank you over and over and over again to everyone he met. The taxi drivers, the waiters and waitresses, his aides, nurses in the hospital, cleaners in the hospital, cashiers, everyone. And so in this spirit, our family has such hakarat hatov to this yeshiva, to the Rosh yeshiva and the teachers, Rabbi Ebner, Rabbi Susman, Rabbi Dovid, Rabbi Berman, Rabbi Flanzer, Rabbi Grumet, and Rabbi Katchen, and at the same time to all of his sweet, and that's how he would describe him, sweet students, for accompanying him on his life's journey. For taking years that have been filled with age and worry and loneliness and many other negative things that can be associated with vision, and filling them with love and learning, exploration and joy and passion. I always say that Earth was the best thing that happened to my father when the period said Aliyah. I was so worried. What would happen to someone who had lived until his retirement after almost 4 decades as a pulpit rabbi, when he no longer had a pulpit? But I think the first Friday night I spent with my parents when they had some yeshiva students over, I took my first breath of relief and I slept better, knowing that he had found his makom. He found his Beit Midrash here in Yerushalayim with you. I had heard so much over the past month about how much my father did for all of you. And I know that that is the case. He did so much for every single person with whom he came into contact. But it is so, so important for us, for you to know how much you did for him. So I know if I could say it in his words today, it would just be 1,000 thank yous for allowing him to live his last years with passion, with life, with learning, and with ease.
The Haftarah that we read yesterday, not read all that often. It's an Haftarah that talks about Eliyahu and Aviva. Great showdown that Eliyahu and Aviva had with the Baal on top of Har Carmel. Showdown with Baal, showdown against Baal. It's an amazing show. They've got a Mizbeach there. They've got their Mizbeach. He's got his Mizbeach that he shows. And in the end of that, incredible. Eliyahu was a great showman. The Israel all call out and say, Hashem hu ha'elokim, Hashem hu ha'elokim. 450 of the Baal were killed, and everybody rallies behind Eliyahu. What's not as well known is what happens in the parak afterwards. Parak afterwards, Eliyahu ends up running away, and he goes to Har Sinai, to Har Chorev. He gets to Har Chorev, and he goes onto the mountain, same place where Moshe was, and he goes into a cave. And some of you might have recognized that cave. Same story happens with Moshe. He goes into a cave on the mountain. B'nei dvar Hashem elav. God comes to him and says, what are you doing here? Eliyahu says, Kano ki neiti la'Hashem Elohei Tzvaot. I am the great zealot for God. I come here to defend God's name. So Hashem says, okay, I want you to go outside. And there's going to be, I'm just going to read this. Hashem over, Ruach gedolah. There's going to be a great big wind, v'chazak, strong enough, mefarei harim, knocks apart the mountains, u'mishaber svaim b'fnei Hashem. Big storm with a lot of wind. Lo baruach Hashem. God's not in the wind. Yachar haruach ra'ash. After that, there's going to be a great big sound, or maybe an earthquake. Lo bara'ash Hashem. You're not going to find God in the ra'ash. Yachar hara'ash eish. After that, there's going to be fire. Sounds a lot like Hartzman. No, lo ba'eish Hashem. You're not going to find God in the fire. Yachar ha'eish kol t'mama. And after the fire, you're going to find a quiet. Sure enough, it happens. He stands there. The whole thing happens. And then God says to him, what are you doing here? And then Yahweh says, Kanoki Nepi Hashem Elohei Tzvah. It's the same exact answer that he gave. Hashem was trying to teach him. You want to have an impact on them. You want to bring people back to God. It doesn't come by being a showdown now. It doesn't come by doing a single act that's going to blow people away. Not baruach, and not bara'ash, and not ba'esh. It's in the cold mamazata, in a quiet voice that you spend, and you work with people, and you talk to them, and you take care of them. You show them that you care about them. The little things that you do day in and day out. And then after Hashem gives him that message, Hashem says, so what are you doing here? And the Eliyahu gives exactly the same answer he gave before him. And what's God's response? You're fired. You don't have a job anymore. Go find yourself a replacement. I'll tell you who to get. Find Elisha. And Elisha turns out to be the Nabi who takes care of people. He doesn't do the big shows. He does a lot of little things. People flock to Elisha. People ran away from Eliyahu. Eliyahu was the man of absolute truth, and he showed everybody, made this great big demonstration of the truth. I think that you want to. There are some people who get up and they think that in a big show and a big display, they're going to decide things. They're going to make huge proclamations. They're going to paskin one way, it's going to blow everybody away. And then there are those who do the work that you don't do. Every day, quietly behind the scenes, modestly, and little bit. I wouldn't say chip away, but smooth away at rough edges. When I think of Rabbi Krauss, I think of someone who had the truth that Eliyahu believed in, and he believed in that truth. But if that truth was not married to Hesed, if that truth was not married to compassion, if that truth was not married to caring about every individual that he came in touch with, then it was not a truth of the Torah. A Torah that doesn't take care of people is not a Torah. That is what Rabbi Krauss meant to me. Let's just share one personal reflection. I've said this a number of times to students, home, to my wife. I spend a lot of my time talking about people. I relish the opportunity to learn from somebody else. What Rabbi Krauss did for me, and I think for the entire faculty, but I can only speak for myself, is he allowed me to become a Talmud. When I was in his presence, I was not a teacher. When I was in his presence, I was not a rabbi. When I was in his presence, I was a Talmud. I was a Talmud of what he taught, and I was a Talmud of who he was. For me, Rabbi Krauss represented not only the great Talmid Chacham who could blow people away, but he was the great Talmid Chacham who understood that the Chokhmah of Torah had to be met. Passion.
But people, there's something else. Not only God is hidden, at times the Jew is hidden. Let me explain. At times we underestimate the uneducated Jew. He doesn't keep anything, and he's not even connected to us at times, and we're doing away with him. But it's a big mistake, because we think that he's unconnected and so on and so forth. But it's a big mistake. I want to give you one example. It happened to me, I can say. It happened in my presence. I became a rabbi in 1966 in the great city called Utica, New York. They called it Sin City. Okay. The Reform movement had a big synagogue temple there, and the conservative movement had a big temple. There were 3,000 Jews in Utica, and the Orthodox Kedar Kambakodesh was split into 4 synagogues. Okay, I was the rabbi of one of them. But I also taught at the extent in that incarnation. I taught at Syracuse University and political science. And why do I tell you that? I tell you that because once a year, speaking of January 67, you must know the dates. January 67, the head of the UJA, the head of the Jewish Community Council said, Rabbi Krauss, you're now the Jew on campus, and every year we have an appeal, so to say. Please give these envelopes to the Jewish faculty members. So I gave it to 4 or 5 or 8, whatever, and one of them happened to be an office mate of mine. He taught literature, I taught political science, but I knew him. We were on a friendly basis. He couldn't stand my kippah, but otherwise we were on a friendly basis. And I gave him that, and I said, Mr. Senior asked that I give that to you, and it's the campaign of UJA for Israel and so on. So he became red. He had a very Jewish sounding name. Became red and started shouting. He lost himself. Go tell Jim Sear, go tell the head of the community council, go tell him that I'm not connected to the Jewish community, I'm not Jewish, and you should stop sending me the newspaper, the weekly Jewish week that everybody gets for giving $5 to UJA, and I don't want it, and of course not. Okay, so excuse me for breathing, I excuse myself. That was January 67. Then came June 67, the 6-day war, And I want to tell you that 3,000 Jews in Utica, the first time they were together, where the 2,500 Jews were at that rally. Because the American Jewry at that time, whatever they say about American Jewry now, I don't know, but at that time, American Jewry was very pro-Israel, and it was packed. And I was sitting where I was sitting, and somebody says, Rabbi Krauss, somebody is looking for you. Somebody is desperately looking for you. Who was it? That professor who said he's not Jewish and who said UJ should bother him, ran with a $5,000 check, he wanted to give it to me, and said one word, they want to destroy us. They want to destroy us. I am with you. That's what, where does that come from? Where does that kind of thing, not just the danger, it comes from something else. It comes from something we say every day. Elokai, neshama shenosata bi, tohorai. A Jew can be mired in anything. He can be mired in assimilation. He can be mired in communism. He can be mired in socialism. He can be mired in many things that are un-Jewish. But when the chips are down, there is one thing that doesn't partake of sin, and that is part of the neshama, part of the dream, came the mystical dream and said, no. If you do that, if you create such kind of separation, God is separated. Because God is only the God of a united Jewish community. God is the God not only of the ethnic Jews, he's also the God of the Arabic Jew, because the Arabic Jew also has a lot in him. As a matter of fact, if you think about it, what happened the last day of Sukkot on Shana Rabbah? What did the Jews parade with? They paraded with the Arava. And when they paraded with the Arava, what does it mean? They gave it kavod. Why? Because the Arava can do something. You're not mevatel the Arava. You don't do it away. As a matter of fact, when they left the Mizbeach, they adorned the Mizbeach with Aravot. Not with etrogim, and not with lulavim, and not with hadassim. They adorned the Mizbeach with Aravot. What does that say? That the Arabic Jew also, when it comes to it, he'll give himself to the Rebbein Shalom. He'll sacrifice himself to the Rebbein Shalom. It's interesting. What did the Jews say, or the Kohanim, when they left the Mizbeach? Says the Gemara, they said, Yoifi lecha Mizbeach, Yoifi lecha Mizbeach. How beautiful are you, Mizbeach? How beautiful are you, Mizbeach? Asked Rabbi Yaakov Weinberg. Rabbi Yaakov Weinberg was the last rector of the rabbinical seminary, the Orthodox rabbinical seminary in Berlin. He asked a wonderful question. He asked a question like this. You say Yofi lecha Mizbeach. When you say the Mizbeach is kadosh, I understand. You bring all the sacrifices and so on. But how could you give an aesthetic, say that the Mizbeach is aesthetically pretty? If anything, the Mizbeach is soiled with the blood and with the ashes, and there's Trumas Hadeshen, you have to clean it every day. How beautiful is the Mizbeach? I think the answer is, it's a wonderful question, but I think the answer is exactly this. Since the Mizbeach had that hakafos midi aravis on HoShana Rabbah, so the Mizbeach is the symbol of the Mesirat Nefesh, of the sacrifice of every Jew, that no Jew is lost, that every Jew can say in the Shema, Shenosato b'toherohi. That's the beauty of the Mizbeach. Have a guten Kvittel and the Gemara Chassidim.
When Rabbi Grumet came to me, as I recall it, but I can stand corrected, and asked me about Rabbi Krauss coming to the yeshiva, to be in the yeshiva. So I don't think I had ever met Rabbi Krauss before. And yet, I was aware of two things. First of all, as a 16-year-old freshman at YU, I went the first Hanukkah. A friend of mine took me on the IRT train. That's a train that in New York that used to cost a dime to go on. And we got off at Kingston Avenue, right? I could stand corrected, right? We took a bus, and we got off. If I remember the address, 350 Stone and Pitkin, Shivas Rabbeinu Chai in Berlin. And I was, for the first time in my life, I was introduced to a person who thought in a way that was remarkable. That was Rav Hutner. So I assumed that in that Beit Midrash, which was a big yeshiva then in New York because it had probably about 100 students, that was a big yeshiva in those days, that Rabbi Krauss was also there. The second time I met with Rabbi Krauss, we spent a year together, at least a year. And that is in, I don't know what the year, whether it was 1963, 64, 64, 65. But I was a student in the Rav Shir, in Rabbi Soloveitchik Shir, and there were these two gentlemen, one of whom was Rabbi Krauss, who are not of the yeshiva, but coming to the shiur every day, which I thought quite remarkable, because there were no guests. It wasn't a spectator sport as far as the Rav was concerned. And everybody was subject to interrogation by the Rav. Right? And they came. Then I found out it's somebody named Simcha Krauss. So when Rabbi Grumet said, I thought it was a terrific idea. It's a terrific idea. And I understood also, this is not why I thought it was a terrific idea. But I knew that there were many retired rabbis who came to Eretz Yisrael to retire, and nobody was asking them to give speeches. And nobody was asking them for anything. They had nothing to do. I knew this from my father. Not because my father did that. My father was a rabbi and celebrated his 25th year in the rabbinate by leaving and becoming an educator. So when my father came to Eretz Yisrael, he was very happy. He went to the Mir, and he learned there for 5 years. He learned the morning Seder every morning. So I said, this is just perfect. It'll be perfect for the yeshiva, and it'll be perfect for Rabbi Krauss. And it was certainly perfect for the yeshiva. I know that being on Zoom, I'm also talking to former students. But former students will criticize me. We're not students. Every year, Rabbi, you used to get up. The first welcoming speech that I used to give when I worked for the yeshiva, when I was on the payroll, and I would say, quote, Rav Hutner. Rav Hutner, and he's the only source I know for this, Rav Hutner, in a drasha that he gave to the students of Yeshivat Eastern Parkway, high school students. I don't know if this place still exists. Does it? No? Okay, I'm learning about that. Does Brooklyn still exist? Are the Dodgers still in Brooklyn? I don't know. So he said, there's a tradition that started in Volozhin. Reb Chaim of Volozhin said that in yeshiva, you're not Talmidei HaYeshiva. You're not students of the yeshiva. You're B'nai Yeshiva. You're children of the yeshiva. And children, a Talmud can leave and then he's gone. But children are always children. And some of the things, all the things I'm going to say today are to try to remind everybody, especially the students, especially the B'nai Yeshiva, who had the good fortune to learn with Rabbi Krauss, to understand that they were truly B'nai Yeshiva for him. And since I said I knew of Rav Krauss, both in terms of his dedication and his commitment to the Rav, Rabbi Soloveitchik, and to Rav Hutner, I'm going to guide myself. The framework will be in terms of his Rebbe. Because after all, Nebuch, when you guys look at me, but I saw the Rav, and the Rav saw his grandfather, and his grandfather, back to Reb Chaim Volozhin, who saw the Vilna Gaon, and then you don't have to go further if you're Litvak. You don't have to go further. The Rav famously said that the meaning of the search. Rabbi Grumet spoke about the Eliyahu. But when Eliyahu goes, the Sarah, Hashamayma, when he goes up in the whirlwind, the B'nai Hanavim, they say to Elisha, we've got to go look for him. And they search for him for 3 days. And the Rav said in a hesped that the meaning of speaking about somebody who is no longer with us is because as long as you're speaking about him, as long as you're trying to find him, the person is still there. So I know that Rabbi Krauss was kein sein schlecht. He's with Rav Hutner, he's with the Rav, he's with his father, he's with the Gedolim. But he's still with us. We're still searching for him. And we are. And everything I say, I will admit that sometimes I embellish things. Sometimes I ask people when I tell stories, did you ever hear this story from me? And the reason I'm doing it is because somebody might say to me, you told it differently last time. But the Rav said that these kind of, when you're speaking about the nifter, it has a din of edus, testimony before the heavenly court. Sof davar hakol nishma. Kadosh Baruch Hu says, sends the Famal Yishamalo, sends the Malachim to ask, Ploni, Ish Kosher, and so on and so forth. And the Malachim come back and miyad mitaso parachas ba'aviv. Rabbi Krauss was a person who loved Torah. He loved Torah. He loved, he loved talking and learning. He loved teaching. Rabbi Yochanan she'ohav es haTorah. I saw in my life, how in three people actually, including my father, but that's not, I saw the Rav when he began to deteriorate physically. And he'd come into the shir and he'd be very weak. And the shirim would always go for at least 2 hours, somewhere around the 15-minute mark. There was not a sick person in the room. There was not a sick Rebbe in the room. And it got to the point that people began to tremble again, because everybody, at least when I was in the shir, trembled when the Rav was in full force. He might ask you a question. He might ask you to read. And when the shir was over, back to when he learned, when he was involved in that love, he became a young person full of fire. And I saw it in the last mamar that Rav Hutner gave in Chaim Berlin. It was Erev Rosh HoShana ben Kessel Osar in 1980. And he came in, looked like a ghost. And I was sitting 10 rows back. The yeshiva was already on Coney Island Avenue. I was sitting 10 rows back. And Rav Hutner had a voice that could break mountains. And I couldn't hear him 10 rows back. And around 5 or 6 minutes in, I began to hear. And after 20 minutes, the mountains were breaking up again. It brought them back to life. They lived Torah. And when you're living Torah, there's no age. It's forever. I say this to you. Boys, B'nai Yeshiva, I say this to you so that you should know. Learn the Torah now. Learn it. Invest yourself. And it will stay with you. It will stay with you. And in Torah, you never grow old. I saw this, we all saw it. You saw it a little bit in the film, in the video of the HoShana Rabba Shir. But everybody who was there, you can see my wife agreeing, right? Everybody who was there saw Rabbi Krauss coming to full life again. The energy, the lifeblood of Torah. She'ohav Rabbi Krauss es HaTorah. Lulei soroscha shashuai ozavadati ba'ani. One of the last things that Rabbi Krauss told me when we took Rabbi Krauss to the faculty sukkah party breakfast at the Susman's, and as we were getting out of the car, he told me, and he told me with ecstasy about he had been learning. He saw one of Rav Aaron Lichtenstein's, who also learned with him in Chaim Berlin, one of Rav Aaron Lichtenstein's Svarim on Kodshim. And he says he said with ecstasy, it's amazing. It clarifies, like. I mentioned Rav Aaron. Rav Aaron in his, which I told Rabbi Krauss the story. I don't think he knew it independently. But I told it to him as we were sitting, we sat together in the sukkah. When Rav Aaron Lichtenstein was maspid Rav Shlomo Zalman, Rav Aaron Zatzal said the following thing. When he said, he was talking about Rav Shlomo Zalman, but he told the following story. He said, I'm sorry if you don't know the names of the people I'm speaking of, but you should know them. Find out who they were. Bother me, I'll tell you who they were. When Rabbi Zalman Meltzer died, Reb Chatzkel Abramsky was maspid him. And he said about him the following thing. He said, if Rabbi Zalman had been in Amoritz, ich mein, I'm sorry for my Yiddish pronunciation, ich mein, an emes Amoritz. You say to the guys, in learning, if somebody calls you, if I'm arguing with somebody in learning and they call me an Amoritz, I feel complimented. I'll call him a poyer. So, right, we're learning. If made an emes Amoritz, if Rabbi Zalman had been truly an Amoritz, but the größte Amoritz in Yerushalayim, the biggest Amoritz in all of Yerushalayim, Reb Chatzkel said, he still would have been the nicest person in Yerushalayim. The nicest person in Yerushalayim. We talk about the biggest gadol. The nicest person. Rabbi Krauss, of course, was nispoiled from that. Of course, Rabbi Krauss was the nicest person in Yerushalayim. Right? Rabbi Krauss was, and it's been said again and again, was an Ohev Tabriot. Of course, descendant of Aaron. In the tradition of the Radomsker and the Tiferes Shlomo, the brothers are told, Yosef is told, Lech no re'ei es shlom achecha, which he says, see what's good about them. Learn to see the good in the others. Mi'oisha Chafetz Chaim Ohev Yomim, if you love days, if you want a good life, Lirot Tov, see the good in the others. These are scattered throughout I think I saw it also in Tiferet Shlomo. That's the following question. It's an excellent question. We make a Birkas HaTorah. So we want to learn some Torah right away. So we could say, we'll say a pasuk of the Torah, right? Could be any pasuk. Any pasuk is equal. Achos, Lotan, Timna. You all know, familiar with that pasuk? No? Mehitavel? Right? The Rambam in the 8th says it's all the same thing. We just don't understand it. But what pasuk do we say? Some of us were zoche to be blessed by Rabbi Krauss. He's a Kohen. We say Birkas Kohanim. And Tiferet Shlomo, I think it's who says that the reason for that is that all the Torah that we learn, all the Torah, including Achos, Lot, and Timna, including Alufei Esav, should be one thing: to bring blessing to the other, to bring goodness to the other. That's what Torah is all about. And of course, that was Rabbi Krauss. We saw a clip from the 10th. It was on the Bowery, right? It's on the Bowery, right? The Beit Chabad on the Bowery. And what did Rabbi Krauss do? He got up. He just gave praise to everybody else. One person here, he called the Bria Hatichon. So I was glad to be somewhat of a shadchan for Rabbi Krauss to be here in the yeshiva. I made a second shadchanos for him. Of course, the person who pulled off the shadchanos was the Bria Hatichon. But I came and I suggested that make a good chavrusa. Rabbi Elazar Meir Taitz, my brother-in-law. And there are people here who remember, and what a model it was for the boys in the yeshiva. I'm speaking to you through Zoom. I'm not seeing you. I hope you're seeing me. To come in and to see these two great Talmidei Chachamim learning together with the passion and the enthusiasm of 18-year-olds. At the Levaya, the first thing that I said to anybody, I said to just people there, I said, Rav Krauss is the living embodiment of a Zehu Mechubad, HaMechabed et HaBriot. And of course, Rav Ideal, okay, said it well and properly and beautifully. Ezel, I just want to tell you a little story that I came to Rav Krauss once. We were talking in the Beis Medrash, in the old Beis Medrash. I remember exactly where I was standing. And I'm telling him about this Pachad Yitzchak letter that I saw. And the letter was written to somebody who was being honored by his community after a number of years as being the Rav. And Rav Hutner had an analogy in there. He said in the old days, every city had a clock tower. You know what a clock tower is? Okay, you do. I went walking out of the National Gallery, and this is the only tangent I'm going to say. I was once walking out of the National Gallery in London. It's one good reason to go to London, maybe the only one. But and it's free. I was walking out of the National Gallery, and I said, it was one of my first times. It was in England, and I said to one of the guards or whatever at the end, I said, "Where's Big Ben?" So he looked at me with disdain. I don't know, because he had an American accent or because, maybe I looked like of a certain variety. He says, "We don't call it Big Ben. It's the clock tower." Right? Sorry. Why did they have he said, Rav Hutner says, because if the tower with the clock on it were this high, so everybody, that's supposed to be the designated time. So everybody walking by would look at their watch and correct the clock tower, right? It's so high up, so everybody has to correct their watch. And he said, this rabbi in his community is the clock tower. Is the clock tower. A lovely thought. I just told this to Rabbi Krauss. And then he seemed to hesitate for a moment. This is what happened. As if he was thinking about whether he should say something or not say. And he said to me, that was, I think he said my 10th anniversary. They made a banquet. It was about me. The letter was written about me. And then he said something further. I don't want to say it now, but at the end of the letter, and he's talking, now we know that he's speaking about Rabbi Krauss. And he says to the community, Hamora da'atra shalachem shlita, Botan hatzkulot, tkunot, uskulot, hanefesh, hamachshirot, et adam litfos et nekomo, v'nekuda gvoa. He has those characteristics that allows a person to be at the high point. And although he is at the high point, and this is what I want to emphasize, the Rebbe then is speaking of a Talmud. The Rebbe is speaking of a child, of a ben. Over Ota Sha'at, the same point that he is far above the reach of the everyday, ordinary person. Over Ota Sha'at, liyot nechmad v'na'im, ahov u'mechubad, ahov u'mechubad, eizehu mechubad hamechabed et habriyot. If there was ever a time that a person wanted just, to feel good, all he would have to do is go and talk to Rabbi Krauss. Just say hello to him. Always a smile. Always a concern. She'ohav Rabbi Krauss, it's a yeshiva, it's a talmidim, et kulanu. Yehi zichro baruch.